Hello, everyone. Typically in my classes, I find that students have trouble creating or generating meaning within the text that I assign to them. And so in this presentation, what I would like to do is to provide some guidance or at least an introduction to what it is that professors like me are asking students to do whenever they read texts and also whenever they have to eventually write essays about those texts. So let's go ahead and get started. Essentially, what I'm asking for students to do is I want them to move from recognizing patterns in the text that they are seeing and then starting to generate meaning. And there's going to be essentially three sections to this presentation that I'm going to focus on. First, we're going to focus on pattern recognition itself, what I'm asking you to do and what I'm asking you to look for. And then second, we're going to talk about essentially a framing approach, which generally this is the perspective that you are adopting whenever you are creating meaning. And then finally, in this presentation, I want to discuss relevancy. So I want to just explain why this kind of skill building process is important, not just to the courses that you are taking, but also to just in life in general and even to future careers that you're going to be having. So we'll be focusing on pattern recognition, a framing approach, and also relevancy within this presentation. Literature professors oftentimes ask for students to look for evidence. They have them look at what characters are doing, or what the plot is doing, or even the narrative structure. And essentially, what we're doing is just actually asking you to look for patterns within the literature. So, as human beings, we naturally seek patterns within our environment. This is how we move around. This is how we can walk into a classroom and know which is the teacher's desk, which is the where the students are supposed to sit, even though we may have never been in that classroom before. We recognize it because we recognize a similar pattern. Students who walk into a classroom know that they are not needing to go and sit at the teacher's desk because that is not for them. That is for the teacher. And the same thing with teachers. Teachers oftentimes will know that the student section is not necessarily for them, especially if they are going to be delivering a lecture or delivering any kind of presentation. Patterns are how we move about within the world. And so this is something we automatically already do. This is how we can recognize, say, for example, a dangerous animal from a safe animal. The same thing, how we can recognize an edible plant from an inedible plant. We just naturally seek patterns. And so we do the same thing whenever we encounter any kind of literary text or any kind of literature. This includes books, poems, songs, movies, films. Anytime that you have generated some kind of meaning or recognized some kind of pattern within a text that you have encountered, you are doing the work that professors or teachers in a literature class are asking you to do. The only difference is that you're not consciously aware of that work. It's just that and you need to become more aware of that meaning creating work that you just naturally already do, right? So when we look at literature, especially literature from the past, one of the things that we can do is we can learn about the past and how that past might have influenced our present by paying attention to the patterns. And so the patterns that we recognize can in some ways illuminate the past for us. And so that means we can learn more about a past culture or a past group of people in terms of how they thought, how they viewed the world. And that can provide a lot of really useful information for us, especially for our present. And so a couple of things that you can look for when you're kind of reading a text, especially when you're reading it for the first time, is you can look for literary elements that can potentially affect meaning. This can include things like plots, the story structure, how the characters get from point A to point Z. You can also look for character motivations and actions. What are some of the things that the characters do? Why did they do those? Or at least what kind of justification did they provide for us? You can even look at narrative structure itself. Did the writer or the creator present us with a linear narrative where we went from point A to point Z, or is it a non-linear narrative where we started with point Z, then moved to point A, then moved to point D, then moved to point E, right? What kind of structure did they provide? You can also look for symbols in literature as well. Symbols are oftentimes, or at least symbols are usually defined as objects or people that mean more or represent more than what they literally are. So, for example, in a Abrahamic religious context, the apple has very significant meaning. It's usually associated with Adam and Eve and the book of Genesis in the Christian Bible, and it usually can represent things like temptation or even knowledge. And so the apple has meaning beyond what it literally is in that context. So symbols can be anything, or anything can be a symbol, but not everything is usually a symbol within a text. What you're looking for is essentially whenever a writer or an artist or a creator continually points to a specific image or a specific idea or a specific thing, then you can kind of see that, oh, has more meaning beyond what it literally is. And that's when you're looking for in symbols. So once again, just remember that when you're looking at literature, you're looking for patterns within that literature. And so you need to start paying attention and start kind of like making note of those patterns within literature in order to help you start to generate some kind of meaning. Now, while we can definitely look for patterns in order to help us get started with creating some kind of meaning, it also matters how we frame our approach, or at least the perspective that we are adopting. So when you're looking at a literary text, there are an infinite number of ways in which you can approach the text. And it's impossible for you to write about all possible meanings within a short essay. It's impossible even for scholars to write about all possible meanings within a 30, 40-page essay or even an entire book. And so you need to start kind of like narrowing your focus. And this is exactly what most scholars do, or anybody who writes about literature. They will narrow their focus to a specific or unique perspective. Sometimes those perspectives will blend, and sometimes they may pull from a variety of different places, but most scholars or most writers of literature, or anybody who's going to be interpreting literature, will be limiting or narrowing their approach to a specific kind of field or topic. So, for example, in my dissertation, which I wrote about Shakespeare and his tragedies, I ended up pulling information from history, from British history, from British culture, from politics, psychology. I ended up pulling up information from the medicine from the time period, and I even ended up discussing gender and sexuality. So I approached essentially how I approached Shakespeare and his representation of traumatic experience. I pulled from all of those fields in my dissertation. Now, I'm not going to ask you, of course, to do that, and most teachers won't ask you to do that in a literature survey class, pull from so many different fields. But how you approach it is also going to affect your meaning, and that is going to affect how you're going to write about it in a potential essay for this class. So how you frame your approach, the perspective that you take as you're approaching this piece of literature, is going to affect the kind of meaning that you're going to write. So kind of when you go into a piece of literature, it does help to think about what kind of framing that you're going to do. And the way that you can do this actually for most courses or most classes that you're going to be taking is look at the prompts or the approach that your teacher is having you look at. So one of the things I usually ask my students to do in their classes is to go to the essays where the essay prompts are in the instructions, and pick one that you think you might want to focus on. That can help make it easier for you to find and locate evidence for that prompt, or for your answer to that prompt, as you're reading. So before you even get started with reading the text, go to the prompts that you're going to be asked to answer and take a look at them and see which one you think might be the most interesting, or which couple of ones might be the most interesting, and narrow your focus to those prompts as you're reading. That will make it much easier for you to locate suitable evidence for the future essay that you're going to write. Now, finally, I do want to discuss a little bit about relevancy. So when I teach classes, especially literature classes, I do get a lot of students who don't really see the importance of what we are doing in that class. But there is actually some relevancy. So Just recently, I heard a colleague tell a story, and so this is not exactly my story or even my kind of like image to this, but it's kind of like when you are a football player or when you're watching a football game or some kind of athletic activity, and you see the athletes performing incredible feats of athleticism. You don't see all the work that went into building those skills. So, for example, you don't see them performing the necessary squats. You don't see them running on a treadmill. You don't see them every day for like a week. You don't see them working out essentially to build the muscles that they need and build their cardiovascular system to the point where they can perform these incredible feats of athleticism. So you don't see the foundation building work on the field, but you do see the results. So, in another way of putting it, it's also kind of like when that frustrating thing that math teachers do when they ask you to show your work, right? They're not asking because they want to see they're not really that concerned necessarily with the answer. I mean, yes, they want you to get the right answer, of course, but what they really want you to do is to take yourself through the process of getting to that answer. The process is more important than necessarily the answer. And so one of the things that this kind of class is going to be helping you with is to taking control of meaning creation. So that way you are hopefully less influenced by some of the art or the text that you might encounter. It also provides some skills so that way you can take control over your own communication skills. So hopefully you can prevent miscommunication. So that way other people who are listening to you can understand what it is that you are attempting to communicate. And it also provides you a way for understanding text and how those texts might actually have an influence over us. So even though we may not be usually consciously aware of the influence that different pieces of literature or the media that we encounter has over us, it does have an influence over us. It's just we want you to become more consciously aware of that influence and of how you can maybe take control over that. And so essentially, again, the skills that you're building in this class, yes, you may never write an essay again after a class like this. And you may never, write an essay about a piece of literature, like in the same way that you're going to be doing in this class. But you are building skills for communication, and you're also building skills to helping you become more conscious of the kind of meaning creation that you are already doing right now. It's just right now you don't have a lot of control over it. Oftentimes it's very unconscious. We want you to try and take control over that so that way you can be more conscious of the kind of meaning that you generate and of the way that you communicate. And so in this way, this is incredibly important skill building. Even though you may not see the end product, this is essentially you working out your brain. So that way you can perform incredible feats in the future, right? And so thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate you taking the time to actually listen and even consider the ideas that I'm trying to um, introduce to students as they embark on this class. And of course, if you have any questions about anything that I'm discussing in this class or even in this video, please don't hesitate to reach out.